best-selling writer, speaker and podcaster known for her psychological thriller Dark Mode, which is now available internationally and shortlisted for the 2024 ABIA General Fiction Book of the Year and the 2024 Danger Awards. Her next thriller, Cold Truth, will be released by Ultimo Press next year in February. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
My first question is, what drew you to writing in the first place?
Oh, I was one of those little kids who loved books, absolutely loved books, and just decided that I could also write a book. And when I was in grade 1, I lived in Moose Jaw, Saskatchewan, and I wrote a little, short story about a wizard who turned frogs, turned kids into frogs. And it was like 3 lines. But it got published in the school district anthology, which had all the kids going up to grade 12, all the best. So I was like, oh, I'm a writer. So I've always wanted to be an author.
I think in primary school, that's when you're doing narrative writing and everything, that starts the spark for some kids who are like, I want to do writing.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because it's just like a world that you can create. So it's kind of when I teach writing, I talk about how creative writing is really the purest form of freedom that we have.
What made you jump into psychological thrillers for your writing, the book Dark Mode?
So I've always been a big crime fiction fan. Even when I was a kid, reading Nancy Drew and the Hardy Boys, and then I was a teenager during John Grisham's heyday, so kind of got really into legal thrillers and just always loved thrillers. I find them fascinating. I didn't try to write one. My first 2 books were nonfiction. But then what happened was in 2017, I got really, really sick, and I was diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, and I spent more than 2 years, almost entirely bedbound. And during that time, I started listening to a lot of true crime podcasts. That was basically one of the only things I could do. And so I listened to hundreds and hundreds of hours of true crime podcasts. And, I never tried to write a crime thriller in part because I was like, well, you have to know all the stuff about forensics and police procedure and legal procedure. And I was like, I don't know all that stuff. And then after, 2 years of intensively listening to true crime podcasts, I was like, maybe I do know about forensics and police procedure.
You've got the TV shows now that go into depth with what they do for cases, so it's like, oh, may as well give it a try.
Yeah, it's basically an education in how to solve crime.
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, yeah, and that was exactly my attitude. I was like, I'm going to try writing a crime novel. I had no expectations. It was COVID lockdown, and I was just like, okay, this is the next thing I'm going to try. If it doesn't work, I'll just go back to nonfiction. So I was really delighted. Dark Mode was the book that got me my agent, got me international publication. Like you said, it's been shortlisted for a bunch of awards. So it's been really affirming to have had something this amazing come out of being so sick. And I'm still in the process of recovering from that illness. So having this career has been really heartening, and it really helped me cope with sort of the impact of being so sick for so long.
And what inspired Cold Truth?
Well, Cold Truth is set in Winnipeg, Canada, during a minus 30-degree winter. I wanted to write about that setting because, I'm from Winnipeg, and Australians will say to me, why did you move to Canada? And I'm like, there was one winter where it was minus 40 for 3 months straight. And that was when I was like, I'm leaving. I'm never coming back to this place. Yeah, too cold. But the story of Cold Truth is the story of a woman named Harlow, and her father goes missing very abruptly, and it's very clear that it's foul play. But the police are not prioritizing his case, and so she sort of drags her sister into investigating his disappearance. And meanwhile, someone has gone on the dark web to try and stop them permanently. And what inspired it was this sort of moment that we're living in where it's getting harder and harder to tell what's real and what's fake. And there's a great anecdote about Winnipeg that just illustrates the theme of the book perfectly, which is that in 1942, Winnipeg staged a full-scale Nazi invasion of itself. They had 3,500 troops fighting a mock battle north of the city first thing in the morning. The Nazi uniforms were shipped up from Hollywood. The Nazis won. They came into the city, they arrested the premier, they arrested the mayor, they went to the libraries and they had book burnings, they went into restaurants, they kicked out the patrons, they got onto buses, they demanded identity papers, they had a march all the way up the main street, which they renamed Adolf Hitlerstrasse. The newspaper came out in German. The radio broadcasts were all in German that day. Any guess why Winnipeg did this?
To prove that people are gullible. Probably be the one.
I like that theory. But actually, it was to raise money for war bonds.
Wow.
And it was hugely successful. They raised, in today's dollars, they raised over $1 billion in money for war bonds to support the war effort. They wanted people to feel like, you know, what it was like for Europeans at the time, you know, for people who were actually facing this as an everyday occurrence. But you know, obviously, like, everybody in the city knew about it because it was there was so much planning that went into having this big thing orchestrated, right? But I always think about, like, there must have been a couple of people who, like, just come home from holiday or, you know, just woken up from a coma or something, didn't know, and, like, walked out their front door and were like, oh, we're under attack. Like, those are the people I was thinking about. And so this is the question at the core of the book, which is, when you can fake anything, how do you know it's real?
It's perfect. I actually really want to read that now. That's like the best thing to
Thank you.
What is your writing process? Do you do research and then go into writing, or do you plan your books, or sort of do you let your characters and setting guide you along?
So what's kind of developed, and what the strategy that I use currently, is that I get kind of an idea for, like, what the sort of core storyline could be, you know, as in, like, it's about a woman whose father goes missing. And then I'll have some kind of, you know, ending bit as well, that obviously, you know, I have a kind of, like, sort of a starting place and maybe an ending place. And so what I'll do is I'll start writing. Might do a little bit of research and, like, okay, like, so for example, Cold Truth has to do with cryptocurrency. So I started doing some research into cryptocurrency. I had this, like, super secretive cryptocurrency enthusiast, like, teach me how to invest in crypto. So I actually, like, have, like, you know, like 0.0000 of Ethereum. And then I don't do a whole bunch of research. I do a little bit and then I start writing because I know the story is going to change. So, for example, I did a whole bunch of research about this certain topic that I was like, this, like, true crime thing that I was fascinated by, and I really wanted to put it in Cold Truth. And then the story just, it wouldn't accommodate it, like, it just didn't work. So then I'll write maybe the first 5-6 chapters, and then what I'll do is I'll go and I'll write a draft of it at that ending. Because I want to think about how I'm going to connect the two. And, like, what, you know, obviously the ending is so important. Like, the opening is so important and the ending is so important. So if you can kind of get a good idea of those, then you can sort of connect in between. And so once I've done that, then I'll probably write a really loose, really rough first draft, like a zero draft, actually. I like to think of it as a zero draft, because then I'm like, none of these words actually matter, it's just about the ideas. Then I will, once I've gotten that, now I've sort of figured out the story and figured out the twists and figured out the red herrings. Now I'm going to go back, and some of those scenes I might be able to take and use, but other scenes I'm going to, you know, just completely rewrite and write an actually readable version of them. Cold Truth was an especially traumatic process because I wrote that whole first draft, spent 18 months on it, and I threw the whole thing out. It was like, it didn't work, it just didn't work. So, like, I kept the setting, I kept the characters, although the one sister, there's two sisters at the core of it, one really changed. But I had an entirely different plot. So then I had 7 months until my deadline, and I was like, okay, like, I gotta write this whole thing. It came together, thankfully. But yeah, it was really, so basically, in short, I throw a lot of writing out. Like, I use the process of writing to generate ideas.
Do you do much of character building? Do you do, like, a character profile before you do your writing or during your writing?
Not so much, because I don't think of characters and plot separately. Like I think readers think of character and plot, like, is it a plot-driven book or is it a character-driven book? As a writer, to me, like, character is plot and plot is character. So as I build my plot, I look at, okay, well, this kind of character, what kind of decision would they make when they're faced with this kind of obstacle? And that sort of, in that zero draft, that again is that process of, like, finding out, okay, like, how does this character work? How do I want to shape them? Like, what works with the plot? Because, like, for example, if a character is too nice and they're not going to make, kind of like in a thriller, people need to make bad decisions.
Yes.
So if a character's too nice or too scared or too, you know, whatever, and it doesn't plot, then I've got to either change that character or get rid of that character, get a new character. So I guess my characters are revealed as I do that drafting.
What advice would you give to a writer working on their first book?
This is my advice. This is what I wish I had known when I started, because I have 4 unpublished manuscripts. So I have, like, Cold Truth is my 4th book, but prior to that I have 4 unpublished manuscripts. So people who read a lot, we think that we therefore understand writing. But what I've come to realize is reading is like being able to drive a car, right? So we can take that car wherever, and we get conceptually how the car works. When we start writing all the parts of the car that we're familiar with. So the body of the car, the paint job, we pick out the paint and all the detailing, we pick out the seats, the steering wheel, we make it all the display, we make it all look nice, right? But the part of the car that we don't understand as readers is the engine. And writing is like being able to open the hood of the car, take apart the engine entirely, and rebuild it. And just because you can drive a car, like I certainly can't rebuild an engine. So you've got to learn about the engine parts, and those are all the aspects of narrative drive. So like character, voice, even plot, those are all the external bits of the car. But narrative drive is the engine of the car, and that really is something, there's a few writers who can do it innately, but most people need to actually learn how narrative drive works and how to use that in their stories, because that's important both at the scene level of the story and at the macro level of the story, so like the story as a whole. And so that was, I said I had those 4 unpublished manuscripts. When I finally learned about narrative drive, then suddenly all my manuscripts after that have been published.
Wow, that's like perfect advice as well. Like, I don't think as readers or like aspiring writers we get that shift that we need to know about writing as well.
Exactly, and it's so different. Like when you read a book, like you're like, oh, this is great. Like characters, plot, voice, like these are the things I can see and experience as a reader. So I think that this is what I'm doing when I'm writing, and it is. Like those things are all important. But the thing that you're not seeing is inside the engine. And so when you're writing your story, you feel like it has narrative drive because like you're creating it, you're living it, like it's all alive in your head. And then you give that to a reader and they're like, it's good, but it's just not really, it's just not there yet.
You haven't really connected the dots for the reader yet. You know all about your book, you know it perfectly, but you have probably not communicated it properly to the reader yet.
Exactly. That's a good way of expressing it. And of course your friends are going to read your book and they're going to come to it, like they care about you and they care about this thing that you've invested all your time to. So they're going to read it really empathetically and they're going to be like, oh no, it's really good. But then you're going to send it to an agent or a publisher and they're going to be like, look, you've got a good idea here, but like you got to go back and like do 8 more drafts. And that's like, it's so hard to understand why if you don't know all those engine components. And once you learn them, it's like, oh, okay, like these pieces fit together like this. So yeah, that's super important.
Have you had another important lesson that you've learned as an author, or that's been like your main key?
I think another really important lesson, and the other thing that really helped me go from 4 unpublished manuscripts to an agent and a 2-book deal, etc., was joining a good writers group. So I have a writers group where we send around 5,000 words, a couple of chapters every month. We email it to each other in advance and we read them really carefully and we make comments. And we're specifically looking at those engine parts. Like it's not just like, do I like this? It's like, how are these different parts? Like, is your scene properly structured? Does your scene have a false defeat or a false victory, for example? And then we meet and we go through and we discuss those things. And the important lesson is that when your readers are giving you feedback, like they're not trying to like make you feel bad or like they're not trying to tear apart your story. They're not trying to change it. What they're trying to do is give you insight into how you can make your story as engaging as possible. And so I really learned to like listen to the feedback from the group. And oftentimes like they'll say something. They'll say, oh, this thing isn't really working. Maybe you can try this. And a lot of times with the thing that they suggest me trying, I'm like, well, that doesn't quite work for me. But I know that if they're saying something doesn't work, that's what they're probably right about. And I need to think about, okay, well, how do I make that stronger? How do I make that better? How do I make that more engaging? And so being able to take feedback is such an important part of being a creative.
And sort of not taking it personally as well, because you can do that, so take things personally so much. It's like, actually, they're not trying to hurt my feelings, even though you feel like they are.
Yeah, exactly. And having a really good support group. So like when our group started, none of us in it were published, and now, like I said, I've had the 4 books come out. Another guy in our group, James Mackenzie Watson, won the Penguin Literary Prize. Another guy in our group, Jonathan Shannon, his debut rom-com just came out last year. So like we're really seeing like people's skills actually progressing.
And that's what you need. You sort of need, and you're helping each other and pumping each other up as well, just to get them excited as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Always perfect. And my final question is, who's been your biggest supporter of your writing?
Oh, that's a great question. I mean, in some ways, my husband, he doesn't read my writing. He's not particularly interested in it, but he has given me the time and space to pursue it, and has, never wanted anything but for me to do what I enjoy. So that's been really lovely. But I think in general, actually, the writing community as a whole, like my writers group, other authors, there's such a supportive writing community in Australia, and I now have writer friends in every capital city. I've met so many wonderful readers. I feel like part of the best thing about writing is the people that I meet through it. So yeah, I just feel like the whole community.
Especially like days like today when I can see like all the authors having chats and everything as well, when there's no people wanting book signed or everything. It's like the best sort of see like you're all like friends and everything as well. So
yeah,
good to see.
Yeah, well, I just really believe like readers are the best people. Like I just think readers, I think through reading we develop so much empathy, and we're just so willing to like listen to other people and appreciate that they all have their own stories. Like, so yeah, I love meeting fellow writers because we share that creative struggle, and then fellow readers as well, because like even if I meet someone and let's say they only read fantasy, which is not something I generally read, but I know we can still have a good chat because we love books, and it just doesn't matter what kind of books they are. Like there's just something wonderful about people who love books.
Yes, and yeah, always good to have a conversation about books, no matter what the time is.
Exactly.
Well, no, thank you so much for the interview today. I absolutely loved talking to you.
Oh,